Hello, all. We are live, and we do have Andrew here already as well. So nice for early viewing. And I'm very pleased to welcome you all here to the channel today, where I have Mike Mollman, the author of Becoming a Druid, Sins and Sorrows to Speak with Elders. And today is actually launching a Kickstarter for Desperate Dispatches, which is book 2.5. Link is in the description. Oh, and you got the physical right there too. There we go.
Yeah, just a flimsy piece of paper. But
hey,
that's what it's going to look like.
It's got a dragon on the cover too, which has me very excited because I know you previously told me there's no dragons yet, and I was really paying attention to the yet, and so I'm excited to get to more of those. But with that, I'll let you introduce yourself here and just give a little introduction to all our viewers here.
Okay, I'm Mike Mollman. I've written 3 books so far in the Protector of Pretanni series. It's going to be 7. Then there's going to be 2 prequels. There might be one that happens afterwards, and there might be a collection of short stories. So I don't know. It'll end someday, maybe. And I already know the next series I'm going to write after this in fantasy is going to take off same time period, but in Iron Age Spain. I have the map. I have the 6 civilizations. I have the gods, the demigods, the dragon. You name it. I got all the world building done. It's what I really want to do. Then I have to, make a story to go along with my map and whatnot. So, and I will be writing after I finish this book for the Kickstarter. I will be writing a sci-fi book, dystopian young adult sci-fi taking place in the 23rd century of Mars. So there's that.
A lot planned. I know I was talking to Andrew as well, since it's here mentioned, but with like some of your bookmarks and like on your website that you do have like covers and things planned for like the next several books, Pretanni, which is really cool. You don't always see that where it's like fully planned. I just love to, because I feel like it's one of the great things about self-pub is what you talked about. They're like, yeah, it's going to be 7 books. Then we got the prequels, the shorts and everything. And just like being able to do like, hey, whatever I want to include here is going to happen. It is always a fun thing with that.
Yeah, I talk to some people who are like want to be authors, and I always tell them, because they're like, what's your method or this? I'm like, I don't know. I did not take English in college. I avoided it like the plague because I would never need it, because I was going to be a chemistry professor at a university. And so, and I don't know. So my whole thing is whatever serves a story best is what you do. And, if you ask me about tropes, I'll be like, I don't know. What's a trope exactly? I don't know any of that. I've read a lot of books. I know what I like, and I try to put that in my books. That's,
yeah. I feel like that's a good way to go about it for sure. So we've got a couple of interesting things in the chat here. So Andrew's having a tea party with his daughter whilst watching us, which the food is all plastic, and so he's very hungry, expiring from hunger, but is still interested to know more about the Kickstarter. So that's the positive thing. We do also have Derek, who's asking if one of the stretch goals is to include more types of owls, which is an absolutely great comment. Derek also, when we were talking about the series as well, he was referring to book 2 as Questception, which I thought was really fun. And I love quest fantasy, and so I really liked book 1, but book 2, when it's just quests on quests on quests, I was so there for it. It was so much fun as well. I do always make jokes about tawny owls. Not everybody always gets them, but when they do, it's really fun for sure.
And because I'm nuts. I actually, all the owls I've recently, are they native to England? Were they there 2,000 years ago? Any plant that he uses, I research. And the one plant I had, it's like yarrow will stop blood. And I look, well, yarrow is an Anglo-Saxon term. I can't use that. They didn't come until the 500. So, I told my brothers just like, why? Who's ever going to know or care? I'm like, I know. So anything in there is native to England or was native there, if it's extinct now, or the plants, everything, because I'm a nut job and this is what I do.
Well, and I heard you talking when you were talking about like the other series that you're one of the people who it's all about the world building and then figuring out the story. So I feel like we should talk about that a little bit because I know there's definitely like there's the people who plan things or the people who focus on characters. And I am such a fan of world building, and I know that not everyone is, but I can so identify with that because like when I think about worlds and like figuring out things work. I feel like I would have so much more fun doing that than actually trying to write a novel. Writing a novel, I feel like would be a lot harder than creating this whole intricate world.
Correct.
And so,
yes.
So I'm not. So, hey, I'm not wrong at least. But do you want to talk a little bit more about that too? Because it's really interesting, and I feel like you say no one will ever know, but you'll have that one like obscure history buff that is like actually this plant it was not there, and so. I'm sure there are people who will appreciate that level of detail, but what makes you want to just really dive in that much to the world with both creating the fictional elements and having the realistic elements?
So when I started thinking, I was just going to like blow off some steam. I'll write a fantasy novel that'll go nowhere, and then I'll jump back to my sci-fi that I've not touched in 4 years now. But it all started. I read article on the internet that said that England has more Iron Age, Bronze Age, Paleolithic, Neolithic stuff lying around than all of mainland Europe combined. And I'm like, England's pretty small. Mainland Europe's pretty big. I'm like, really? So I actually, looked and I got like a map of where they're at, and I'm like, there are over 4,000 things lying around that they never cleaned up in Britain, and some of them are like 5,000-6,000 years old. I'm like, really? Never did we, so me being me, I mean, I'm a chemist in my day job, so I like data. So I start looking at them, and then I start categorizing them and opened up my spreadsheet and got the different types and, long barrows, and we got, henges, and we have, and then I was like, there's a story in here. I mean, all these different things, I mean, each one could be a different place of power. I'm like, where do I have this? And I was like, you know what? Druids. Always want to learn more about Druids. This is going to be their places of power. And then I read about Stonehenge, and that happened 1,700 years before the Druids ever landed on England. I'm like, so that had to be created by an elder race. Okay, so there were elder races, giants, elves, the normal ones, and they got disgusted with men, and they left and said, you'll either grow up or you'll exterminate yourselves. And so that was kind of the impetus. I was like, this is the land. And then I always think that I did it out of weakness, not out of strength. But I was like, how do I build a whole world? You know what? I'm just going to steal England because it already has the geology and it has the rivers, and that way and the names are most of the rivers are named or Celtic names, so I keep the names of the rivers and whatnot. And I was like, this way I have my map, and then I can just redefine it. So all the cities they go to are actual cities. And I changed lots and lots of things. Like if you're in Southampton, I chose the medieval site as being the Celtic city, which was not true. It's really up the river or something but I was like, no, this makes it more dramatic. We'll fudge things. But
that's the nice thing about even if you're using the real world, you still get to play around with it because it's fantasy.
And I just live in fear that sometime someone's going to go, well, in October in Bath, it would not be snowing. So this is, and I'm waiting for someone to, go with that level of specificity because I've never been to England. So, I was using Google like, okay, 42, and it gives it in Celsius, and I have to convert. And my editor, my developmental editor, when she read it, she goes, I haven't been to England as much as you have, but I've been there before, and you really capture it. And I was like, well, I've never been to England. So that was my first inkling, like I might have something that's worth publishing here. When she told me that, I was like, okay, I fooled her. So,
hey, that's a good sign for sure. Yeah, if you can make somebody from there think that you've actually been there and is super familiar, that's a good thing for sure. We've got here wants his own personal henge. Understandable, don't we all? We got T showing up here as well. Yeah, you've got plenty of time. You're not too late. That kind of detail. Oh, I think you're talking about the person who's like, actually, it wouldn't be that temperature. Like, yeah, I don't ever find myself going in there. Like, if something I'm like, this doesn't make sense, I'll probably say it. But yeah, I would never be one of the kinds of people that's like analyzing, trying to find a historical inaccuracy in a book, especially fantasy, because you get to, even if you're, you know, using England, it's still a complete fantastical world. So
yeah.
But I could see somebody someday doing that.
I was on a panel once with another writer who had published 20, 25 books. He's like, look, if you're writing your book, there are people who will come out of the woodwork if you get something wrong about motorcycles, guns, or horses. He goes, other than that, no one cares. Those three, people who are those aficionados, they will come, the Kawasaki did not have a 1974 or whatever. He goes, those are the ones, and you just have to go, yep, you got me. Good on you. And then just keep on moving. So
I could see that with all of those things for sure. I have seen people do it with horses in fantasy too. And I've seen it both ways, where like if somebody gets things too correct, people will be like, oh my gosh, this doesn't make sense, blah, blah. And it's like, no, that's actually correct and like the way it works. Or people who don't, and like they're like, this is wrong. So like sometimes like you can't always win. Yeah, I can agree, which is, you're probably not going to get that many. And ultimately you just kind of have to be like, yeah, you're right. It's all good. And kind of go from there for sure. So before we continue, going super off topic, but we started talking about world building, and that's always what gets me, is when we're going that route of like, yes, but I know you mentioned that you have a very interesting origin story, so I want to make sure we cover that, because that seems like that belongs at the beginning of the stream. So I'm really curious now, because you haven't told me what it is, but let's hear it. Yeah.
Okay, so I decided to start writing on February 25th, 2017. A very hard date. So that's a Saturday. The day before, a friend of mine at work, Angela, she said, Mike, I know you read a ton. We have my friend's daughter is coming up to the local library for a book reading and signing. And it's last minute. We're just afraid nobody's going to be there, and we don't want it to be no one there. Would you mind coming to a book signing? And I was like, you know what? As many books as I've read, I've never met another author. I've never gone to a book signing. I was like, yes, I'm there. No questions asked. 10 o'clock next morning, I am there at the library. And it's a woman who wrote her love triangle between three 17-year-olds. The two males have been biologically enhanced to be perfect male specimens, and the girl is trying to decide which perfect male specimen should be her boyfriend. You could not get,
doesn't sound like for me.
And I'm like, note to self, next time ask what the book is about before you show up.
Tips, people. Tips.
And then I start looking around, and I am the only male present. Now, on an aside, whenever you hear about serial rapists, arsonists, child abductors, whatever, they're always middle-aged white men who live alone in a quiet neighborhood, whose neighbors say he keeps to himself. We don't know anything about him. So I'm going, I'm that middle-aged single white man living alone in a quiet neighborhood. So I'm like, okay, the mothers came with like 14 and 12-year-old daughters. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to be weird. There's no way out of that. I'm like, but if I sit in the back, then they're going to see who is that creepy guy and was he staring at my daughter? So I'm like, I have to sit in the front row, because that way, if nothing else, they know I'm not, back there being all creepy. So I sat in the front row, and she, talked about her spiel and like, any questions? And I have zero interest in this book. I should also mention it was published by Clean Teen, which meant there was no sex, no drugs, no alcohol, no smoking, no violence, and no name calling allowed in the book. How you can write a book that's in any way entertaining without any of those, I don't know. So she asked for questions, and it's all crickets. And so I'm like, how did you publish your book? What? No, specifically, walk me through the process. And all the things you're not supposed to do with authors. Tell me about the process. I don't care about your work. But I and no one else was asking any questions. So she went through took me through. You put it on the KDP, you put it on Amazon, you can just click of a button, it's up, it costs nothing. And I'm like, really? It costs nothing to publish, which is a lie. It's a lie. It's a lie. But so then I ended up, I had to buy the book. I went to the talk and I asked all sorts of off-topic questions. So I bought the book and I went home and I was like, fine, I'm going to read this stupid thing and I'm just going to make fun of her the whole time because I hate everything about this story. And I read it and I started reading. I was like, the writing's good. I don't, there's nothing wrong with the writing. I don't care one bit about 17-year-old love triangles, and so I read the whole thing and I was like, you know what? I could do that. And I was like, can I? And that's why I started, all because of this one random thing where I didn't want people to think I was some perv sitting in the back. So that's why you have Grommy.
I mean, that is pretty great as an origin story. So I just love the setup of that too. Where it's like you try to do something nice, and you're like, oh no, I definitely don't fit here. We do have a very chaotic chat going on here, so I'll jump over here super quick. Andrew being held hostage and yelled at for doing the Tea Party wrong. Anita is here as well. Andrew getting after me to talk about the Kickstarter, so that's what we'll do next. For sure, going there. Anita, who thinks I might secretly be a serial killer, and that's why I was laughing at your story. Derek says I can summon demons. I'll have to try. I haven't tried summoning demons yet. So, it's from T. And we got Benghis Khan here as well. With the origin story, which that's a really fantastic origin story. Oh, and he's halfway through to speak with elders. That's such a fun one. That's what we were talking about. There's just like, especially if you like quests, and like Derek, who's here, he said he's not usually a big fan of quest fantasy, and he still enjoyed it. And so I'm like, that tells you it's still enjoyable anyway. But especially for someone who likes quests, such a fun book. Just such a fun book here. But I'd be remiss if I don't share a little bit more about the Kickstarter. So let me see if I can just do this window here and make this work. There we go.
Oh, look at that.
So here's the Kickstarter. Yeah, we're actually already here at 248 out of the 1,500 goal. Very, very, simple Kickstarter here. With it, you do have a nice little video here for it. It is available now. As you can see, we already have some people starting to back. I still got to go in and look through. But I think there's, for rewards-wise, you have options for ebook or physical book or getting all of the books. You have signed, you have paperback, you have hardcover. So a lot of options.
Yep, and I always tell people, you've heard of people who are minimalists I'm a maximalist, so I got maps of the cities. I got maps of Pretanni. I got sword bookmarks, like this little guy. There we go. That I will give you a thank you note. I'll put your name in the back and the acknowledgments. I was like, what else can I do? What it's the whole world builder in me, and I can add this, and I can add, and so you'll get all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and there's a lot of options, and I mean, especially for considering the price of a paperback or a hardcover book, that it's signed, that it comes with maps, which you want to win me over, including a map definitely works on me. I am very susceptible to maps because I just love them. And so, so I mean, really cool. This is definitely just looking at this because I peeked at this with the preview as well too. It's very, very affordable. Especially if you're like me and you're going to be buying the next book anyway, you can get some extra stuff here and help get it going. So definitely check it out. Like I said, link is in the description for here. It is available now. So definitely check out and go. And like I said, there's lots of different reward options too, whether you just want to keep it simple and get it. And even like you get a personal acknowledgement even for the ebook, too. So like it's still a lot of options. Getting all the books bundles. I mean, like there's some deals here, just in general for getting the books 100%. So
yeah, my whole feeling was I could have done a launch for on Amazon, but then they're keeping 30% of the ebooks, and I get $4 to $6 for each paperback or hardback that's sold. in Kickstarter, they take 10%, you get the rest. I'm like, so I can include a lot of other stuff. I will make more money. You will get more stuff. I'll be happy to sign it. So, I mean, this is really in lieu of doing a launch party. I said, why would you not launch off of Kickstarter? And then you can personalize it. You can talk to people. So that, I mean, and I promised myself when I started, because I'm not an autograph person. I could not care less. Unless it's a check, I don't care if I have your autograph or not. So I was like, you know what? I don't care if I get as big as Stephen King, which will not happen. But anyway, I am never, ever charging for an autograph. Never once. Because I've gone to Comic-Cons and like William Shatner, I think, was charging $220 to sign something. And I'm like, that's nuts. I mean, I'm not an autograph person anyway, so I would never pay that. But I was like, no, you know what? I will never be one of those people. So then I was like, well, if I want to charge more for the autograph ones, I have to give you more stuff then, because, that's my hard and fast rule.
Fair enough. Well, I can see that. Yeah, like, I don't know. There is something cool about having signed books, but I'm also not the type of person who would like pay a ridiculous sum for a signed book typically. Like even like the special editions where they advertise like signed and whatnot. I'm like, I'm more curious, is the book itself really cool and high quality? For sure. So I can understand that, but that's a nice way to look at it for sure. The origin story needs to be in your author bio. No, because then it won't be a unique experience of him telling it in an interview and making me cackle and want to fall out of my chair. So it was much more fun with a reveal here for sure. T is also a map nerd, which yep. And Ben is interested in those prints as well. T saying don't own the books physically yet. This is a great opportunity for it. To work on getting some physical books. Andrew has backed it.
Woohoo!
Very nice. I should have refreshed it to see how much it's changed since we've been on. It has gone up to 288 now. So we've had some traction just from being on. It's gone up a little bit since we started talking about it. So I don't know if I can take credit for that or not. It could have just been coincidence, but we'll call it a good thing for sure. I could see that when you can't get a signature anymore. Insert Nico cackles into author. Oh, there we go. Bart's book's back to it as well here. Oh, and Andrew's tweeting out about it too. So we should get some good press with it as well. So it was the funny thing about the Kickstarter is, so because Mike, you had said you were planning on doing the Kickstarter soon, but then apart from that, I had approached you about doing the interview, and you're like, hey, this is great time. Let's also launch at the same time. And so I feel like it's a win-win. Do the interview and then launch it. So it was really great timing.
So I will tell you, I forget who is reading. Ben is reading To Speak with Elders. That book. The first two pieces of feedback I got were people said, the first book is good, but it's a little slow. And I said, slow, huh? Not going to have that problem. So I race. I mean, they are like sprinting the whole time. Like, okay, no time for breath. Next thing. And I really think I went too fast. So I tried to pull back the reins a little bit. And then as I got more feedback, I was like, well, the first quarter of your first book, you have to set up the world. So it's going to be a little slow. So I don't know. I think I got some bad advice, but I was so new that I was like, oh my God, I must fix it. So that one, I tell people, okay, get ready to run. Get your running shoes on because they move.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, and that's, it's got to be hard and probably take some time to figure out, what feedback to really take to heart to do and to make changes and what to maybe have it be different. Because it's hard to kind of know. And I guess I wouldn't consider becoming a druid to be slow, but also I read a lot of really slow books, and not everybody does. So I know my opinions are kind of skewed, because I feel like both of them were paced well. There was a lot going on. And you do that kind of thing that you used to get a lot more in fantasy books, is less common now, where you kind of skip over unimportant things. Like you'll have travel if it's relevant, but if it's not, you'll be like, they're there now. Let's continue on with the story sometimes. So I mean that can make it feel like it's moving quicker too.
Yeah.
But that's always one of those interesting things. Sometimes people really don't like that. Other people love that. And I've seen some of that being done a little bit more lately. And like Howard Andrew Jones did that as well, especially in his most recent book. You skip anything that's not important. Like if they're traveling to the next city, well, the next chapter starts and they're already there. We're no travel. And a lot of the travel is relevant in your books too. But you definitely have some of those skips where like they're going here and they're there.
Well, that was another one. I was like, if I do that, then I don't have to worry about the horses. Like, how far can they run before they be stopped? I was like, I don't know, and I don't want to learn.
Hey, that's smart.
So
I can get that for sure. So we have T is working on backing it already. Andrew asking who does your cover art.
So Dmitry Yahovsky does it. He's Belarusian. And I always tell the story about him. He's married a Dutch wife. They live in Poland, and they had a child. So other than European, I don't know what you can call this child.
That is great, the mix there. I was going to say, I was pretty sure it was on. He does list everybody. Okay, actually, hold on. I got to turn the screen share back on for a minute because I just saw what you did here that I didn't even catch before. So here's back on the Kickstarter here. So we have the team, and we have artist, cartographer, city map maker, agent of chaos, which is great, alpha reader, line editor, proofreader, and then lowly author, Mike Mollman at the bottom there. I did not notice that when I looked at this before or when I was sharing. So you got a great team here. It's the art's definitely been fun, and I really like this new cover, and the maps look really great as well.
Yeah, I can tell you the covers. The reason why I have all the covers for all the books is that Dimitri he said, "Hey, I've just been included in this prestigious online art gallery." Which, what does prestigious online art gallery mean? But whatever, And he's like, "Yeah, I've just been accepted." And I looked, and all of his paintings that he had, they quintupled the price. So like his original oil paintings were $500, they're $2,500, and I was like, "Huh? Can you do the rest of my book covers now before you get found and charge an arm and a leg?" So that's why I have all 7 of my book covers. And then actually for this one coming out, Desperate Dispatches, I had a book cover, which if you look on the bookmark, you'll see. And then I got this one with the dragon, which was much cooler. And then I was like, well, if I have 2 of the 4 stories, I have a picture from each of those, I should have the other 2 stories, a scene from each of those stories as well. So now at whatever level you will get copies of the book covers. So each novella basically is going to have its own book cover. I don't know if I'll be able to have them printed in color like in the book itself. So if nothing else, I'll have I don't know what you call the paper you put like over wedding invitations so you can still read what's behind it. But like I have the pictures on that so they can fold and not, but in one way or another, you'll get images of the art because I have one now for each of the 4 novellas. And basically I like to spend my money on these extraneous things. So
see, that's where you're like a true book collector / author for sure. Because wanting all of the little extra things, I can absolutely get that 100%. That makes a lot of sense. Oh, and T saw the thing about being a main character too. I feel like I'm doing a really bad job talking about Kickstarter because we keep everybody's very interested in it, which is great. But I feel like we keep talking about things I didn't mention. So yes, the like top of the line goals here is where you can be a character in a future book, and then there's one even after this where you can star in your own short story, which I love the description here. Want to be a hero and have fictional characters sing your praises. Want to be a villain and have people lament experiencing your wrath. And so here's comes with everything else, and you get to also get your own short story here. So there's some pretty cool and unique stuff here. I feel like you really have done a great job of having a ton of stuff available that lets you get, you can kind of choose any level that you want, but you also have a lot of options to get just all kinds of stuff. as well with it. And like you have add-ons as an option too, where you can add on the other books, like if you're just getting one. So there's so much stuff here as well. So yeah, we'll see if it's let me refresh again here just for fun. Oh, it's not updating here yet, but so I'm sure we'll see some more change as well, hopefully there. But yes, so there we go. I feel like I'm waiting for somebody in the comments to tell me I still haven't adequately gone over the Kickstarter. I feel like it's pretty good. Did you have anything specifically else you wanted to mention about the Kickstarter? I'll ask.
No, my buddy Ro, who does my editing, when I showed him this, he's like, "You're going to do a short story?" He's like, "Well, I'd shoot for like 10,000 words." He goes, "How many of these are you going to do?" I was like, "I don't know, 10. If I can sell them, I'd be dancing online. I will dance with being filmed if that happens. If I get $3,000 for this." And he's like,
"All right, new stretch goal."
and he's like, "But it takes you almost a year to write a 100,000-page book. If you get 10 people, that's your next book." I'm like, "Okay, so I get $3,000 up front. I write a book, and then everyone buys it anyway. I don't see the downside here."
I mean, yeah, I could see you just turning it into a whole collection too. Then yeah, and you could make that work.
So I was working on this book, and then because the world building bug came, and so I stopped. I took an entire week, and I said, "You know what? The merfolk, they're one of the elder races, but I don't know anything about them. They're not going to show up anywhere in these 7 books, nowhere." But I took an entire week off, and I got the map of the North Atlantic, and their cities are on the continental shelf, and the abyssal plain beneath them is where the Leviathan is, which is their enemy. And I have 7 pages of notes now on the merfolk. And I'm like, they're not in the story. They're not. So if I get any short stories like, "So you want to be a merfolk?" Because I got a lot.
There you go.
And then
that's a fantastic idea. Yeah.
And then the giants, I decided, did not get play along with the other ones at Elderhome, the island they went off to, which was Iceland. So they moved to the Faroe Islands, and they tried to invade Pretanni 300 years before the Grommy tale starts. But the Druids up in the northern edge of Scotland that I never talk about, they defeated them in a naval battle. I'm like, yeah, I want to write about that now too. But that, again, not part of this series. So there's a lot of other things that are going to happen. And so, yes, I will eventually write these. And the reason book 1.5 came about is I wrote the 3 short stories about Grommy. I was like, well, great. What do I do with these? I mean, I don't want to just keep them for myself. And so then I realized that I started talking to Grommy and telling him how he has to start going to throne rooms and, making things happen so we can have an all-out war. And no, I'm going to hang out in the forest and talk to squirrels. And I, yelled and cajoled and everything else. And I was like, okay, well, book 1.5, we're going to have other people do the dirty work that Grommy refuses to do. So that's why the half books, which is the dumbest numbering system in the world. And when I'm like, book 2.5 is the 4th book in the series. Oh, makes my OCD, sets it off. And book 4 will be the 7th and final book in the series. Ugh. Oh, how can you not cringe when you hear that? So, but again, like I said, my old rule is always whatever serves the story best is what happens. So was this the best way to plan it out? Probably not, but it's what we're doing.
Hey, sometimes it happens, and it's nice having the flexibility there to just explore different things, and especially for a first person story, having kind of the short stories to show some other POVs, I think can be interesting because like it's really important to the world too. Especially, I feel like a lot of the stuff going on in Sins and Sorrows was like building out like the overall political situation and getting things ready with the world. Whereas To Speak with Elders is just Grommy off doing stuff. And so I imagine a lot more will come up here too. And I'm really curious to get my hands on Desperate Dispatches too. And see where that one goes for sure.
So I'll tell you, for all the novellas so far, I've written 6. The storyline, the story arc, I don't care. Throw that away. There are certain things in there that I need to tell the reader because they'll be important later. but I didn't want to be just on the nose like this. I did this one, so they're there. And then I was like, okay, now I have to craft a story that's interesting in its own right to graft over top of this information that the reader needs to have, because it will be very important later. So all the story arcs were kind of like, okay, how can I give this information away without letting everyone know that it's kind of critical? And that's what the novellas, their purpose is, really. I mean, I want to make them interesting, and I like the other voices and the other characters, getting to know them a little bit better. But yeah, everything there was, again, I started world building, and then, okay, now I need a story. So.
Bye, T. Gotta run. But so we're talking about kind of the writing and the world building, and here I'm trying to take the good segues when they come, because I know we both have the tendency to just go onto a topic, but we're talking about it because something I kind of wanted to talk about is your inspirations with Pretanni and the series, and we've already kind of touched on that a little bit, and you told me how some of it came to be, but I mean specifically, it definitely, to me at least, I always describe it as it kind of reminds me of like 80s fantasy and kind of some of the feel of it. And like, you don't get a lot of druids anymore. I don't feel like that's not common to see. So having a druid, let alone a mustachioed druid, which I don't even remember when I first picked it up, though, I made fun of Alan from the Library of Alexandria, was complaining about something completely different and a character's mustache being described. So specifically, I'm like, I'm going to write a book where the main character has a mustache. And then shortly after becoming a druid, and I'm like, main character has a mustache. Yes. So that was a completely unrelated aside, but just something fun. But with kind of the pacing and the style and the feel, that's kind of the feeling it gives me. So I don't know if that was intentional or that just came to you kind of writing the kind of story you wanted to write, but what were some of the inspirations and things that gave you the style that you write in?
So I did not set out to write another Forgotten Realms book, but I probably read 100 of those in the 80s, and Dragonlance I probably read 50 or 60. So when I went to write my own book, and I had no training on how to write because I didn't even take English 101, I just kind of wrote what I had most familiar with. So, I mean, really, when you first said, I was like, oh, Nico, he's saying my books are 40 years out of date. And I thought about it. I was like, you know what? I like those books better than a lot of things, more modern things. I don't know. Yeah. The 90s and the early first century or first decade, I did not like much of the fantasy. I didn't read a lot. But I think, especially now that I start doing more indie, love the indie stuff. Traditional published, I don't know. It kind of feels sometimes rehashed. Like it's, like Hunger Games was popular, and then they did Divergent, and then they did Maze Runner, and it's just tell me the same story again and again. Or like John Grisham books
already being a ripoff of Battle Royale, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, it's just for the record. When I say it kind of has like an 80s throwback feel, I don't at all mean that in a negative way, and I'm not saying like, oh, this feels like it's super dated, because it doesn't. It just kind of it has that feel, which for me is kind of nice and refreshing, because you don't get books like these very often anymore. And with indie, kind of like you said, I think that's been a great way for more variety, because the publishers tend to push the same kind of books again and again. They want similar books. They want books that are exceedingly modern sometimes. And as a classic fantasy lover, I love when I discover something new and current that's being written that scratches that kind of more classic itch for me, for sure. So I mean that in the most positive possible way. I'm like, oh, this is kind of like, like an 80s style. That's great, because I love a lot of older fantasy. And so definitely was a positive thing for me.
No, I mean, you have to remember, I'm a neurotic author. So anything, I'm like, how can I take this the wrong way? And then I have to, stop, take a breath, and okay, So yeah, but you're walking on eggshells, and it's silly, because like when I'm at work, if someone says they don't like this or that, I'm like, okay, whatever. So, but yeah, it's
with your books, it's got to be a little harder. Like I can see that. I feel like that's definitely something you you would have to just get used to. I feel like because it's when you're writing something, you're making your art, you're putting it out there. Of course, not everyone's going to like it. Some people love it, some people hate it. A lot of people be in between. You never know. But I mean, like, they can't be that easy, versus like a work project. So I can imagine that would be difficult at times for sure. But
so
we've got. So Bards and Books always has a druid in D&D. So that's probably, somewhere you'll still find druids for sure. Even a lot of trad pub covers kind of look the same lately. Definitely agree with that. And I feel like a lot of them are the same kind of like minimalist line art kind of thing. Give me my action covers any day, 100%. That's another thing with not to get off on a crazy big tangent, but with covers, I love the old school style fantasy covers, and I hate that we're becoming less and less common for that. It's just like it's something pretty simple, and sometimes those can still look good, but I love the scene from the book cool covers type of thing with it. Was that like a conscious choice specifically? Because we talked about your art a little bit where you got the scenes. Did you have things like in mind, or was it kind of just pick something from here?
Well, again, why you were right when you said this is like an 80s book, because I was like, okay, well, what's a cool scene from my book? I'm going to put that on the cover. And
I approve.
And I can tell you when I wrote Becoming a Druid, I was like, you know what? Everyone has dragons all the time. I'm not going to have any other races other than human. And then if you show book 2, there's a centaur on the cover. So
you started with human, and so you still accomplished that for sure.
So
and we're finally getting dragons soon.
So yes, and then once I had the dragon, I was like, I have to put the dragon on the cover because I get asked all the time at Comic Cons, are there dragons in your books? And I'm like, not yet. And so now I'm like, you know what? Just gonna put a dragon on the cover. Makes everybody will want to come look at it if nothing else, hopefully. And then they won't be asking me that question because they don't show up till the 4th book in the series. So
I'm definitely guilty of that 100% too. And that's, I mean, like, I know, I can actually really appreciate that you did a lot of other stuff and more unique elements. You focused on some races you don't always see. And I'm happy that we're getting dragons, but it's actually kind of cool that that's a later edition, whereas we're focusing on other stuff too, because, the fantasy creature races that you have are things that you've seen, but they're, I feel like, not always the focus, because it's usually just like humans or elves and dragons, and we're really focusing on other stuff, which is cool to do, I think.
And I hate elves. I have very strongly opinionated. I hate elves, and there's not too many places where I can say this and people don't think I should be committed.
Well, I'm really, you gotta elaborate on that, because I'm really curious now. So where does the elf hate come from?
So Lord of the Rings, I'm very much team dwarf. Love the dwarves, and the elves are just, I'm like, stop singing your stupid songs and go do something. I have no patience for them. So that's why I was like, okay, I have to have the elves, because I looked, what is British mythology, and so the giants, merfolk, pixies, centaurs not so much, but details. And then elves, I was like, okay, these are all show up in British mythology. That I'm going to try to keep that sort of feel. And then I was like, but I don't want to write about them. So they left 800 years ago, and so no one even knows what they look like anymore or anything, because it's all just been lost to myth. So
I love that so much, because you do sometimes like that's, I don't know, maybe it's a trope or not, but you get that in fantasy sometimes. It's like an elder race that is gone now. I love that yours is the elves, just because you're like, I don't want to freaking write about elves, but they should probably exist. So like, that is the best reason ever to have the elder race that's departed. I would have never guessed that was the reason why, with reading the books, that was brought up. So that's a really fun detail.
I have friends who are like, well, you have to write about year 1000 when the elder races come back. And I'm like, no, I don't.
There's
No.
going to be a conspicuous change in time there where, we'll go forward further and then they'll be gone again. It's the way time works,
Yeah.
So we had a Bards and Books saying, looked at becoming a Druid as a more traditional storytelling, like the era it's set in, which, yeah, I can agree. Has that feel for sure. And then, hey, Christopher Nabo here. So that's what I enjoy about indie self-pub books. I'm always pleasantly surprised. There's always something unique presented. Yeah, I definitely agree. It's you do with indie, and it's why it's so cool seeing indie authors and books just get a lot more attention. And I mean, getting to sit and have these conversations and talk about the books and everything, because the more indie I've read, whereas there are still, my trad pub books that I've enjoyed, but I found a lot of the new big ones have been pretty hit or miss for me. Whereas with indie, there's so many exciting things I'm finding all of the time. And there's things that are a little bit more niche and different. And, so like this series where it just really is these are fun books for me. Even there are very much some serious parts to them too. I'm not saying, they're comedy by any means, but they're fun. I enjoy it. I enjoy the style and what's being done. And it's really nice to jump into this versus a lot of things. But I found that with a lot of other indie series too. Where Andrew D. Meredith is another one where his books are super unique and the way he story tells. And I really enjoy them. It's the kind of thing it'd be hard to ever see self-published because people would be like, it's too niche. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm in that niche and I love it. So it works really well for me. Oh, we got another Kickstarter pledge as well.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
We're at 338 now. So
awesome.
Now, okay, you guys, now here's what we're going to do. We're going to keep talking until the goal is met. No, I'm kidding. But that's your goal. That's your goal, Chad, is to share it around and try to get as close to the goal as possible while we're live. We'll have the phone lines ready to take your pledge calls, like it's one of those.
So I might mention that in one of the novellas coming out, there are two guards named Nikos and Andros in the book. Don't know where I was inspired to come up with those names.
Nikos and Andros. That is fantastic. So I was going to say, I wonder if Andrew's still here. He might have gotten kidnapped by his daughter again. But
well, if he's not following the rules.
Cool. That is true. From what I was hearing in the chat, he was doing a very poor job at the Tea Party, so it's understandable if he's in timeout now. Chris excited with Kickstarter as well. So I was to say I haven't even pledged yet. I'm going to go do it after this, but that's where I'm like, I feel like a bad host. I should have done that before so I can be like, see, I've already pledged. I'm 100% going to. For me, it's going to be narrowing down what all bonuses I want because everything looks so cool. And so that's where I'm like, I need to look more and determine what I'm going to get there with it for sure.
So I'll tell you, with my book, the number one complaint that I get is that people are like, I just don't like Grommy. And I hear that. I'm like, okay, I can understand that. But I actually chose that specifically because once again, I was on the internet reading and I came across an article where a person said, if you know your Myers-Briggs, said people who are INTJ cannot be heroes. They don't have the personality for it. The thinking and the judgmental. They don't, won't deal with other people well. They just cannot be heroes, but they make spectacular villains. And then they went on to list Moriarty, if you're really old school, or Magneto, Voldemort, or my personal favorite, Hannibal Lecter. And I am an INTJ. So I was like, hero can't be an INTJ, huh? I'm writing one. And I was like, you know what? I've not written a thing. And if it fails, no one will know. So I'm going to do that. So I intentionally made Grommy INTJ so that he's, no, this is the way to do it. You have the information I do. You should come to the same conclusion. Why are you deficient? that sort of, and that's just him. And so I wrote him that way specifically just to prove this one random article wrong. Because, that's
I definitely don't bookmark articles about books that I disagree with to eventually go live and make fun of. That's not a thing that I do ever for any reason, for sure. So no.
So, so when I get all the time, like people who end up liking the book, like, well, he's a little hard to get to like in the beginning. And I'm like, yeah, well, this is the story of my life. So. So I mean, I get it. It's not untrue, but I mean that was a conscious choice that I made. I was like, no, I'm going to do this because someone said it can't be done, and I have zero chops at writing. So why don't we just do this anyway? So
well, and it's something too that makes the character stand out, and I feel like be a little bit more unique, and it helps with, especially I feel like it's kind of. Probably that's part of the mix that for me gives the books the charm is you have kind of a non-traditional main character in a more traditional fantasy environment with other unique things thrown in too. But, instead of just having the normal kind of hero archetype here, you have Gromit, and, he probably doesn't think he's cut out to be a hero, but he's trying, dang it. And he's just a really fun character for me to read. I feel like sometimes you just get that with books where if you don't mesh with the main character, you're going to have a bad time, and so it's always going to depend. So we had Terry asking if the guards would be like those in J.V. Jones books, which I'm ashamed to admit I have several J.V. Jones books. I still need to read them, so I'm not entirely sure I get the reference, Terry, but I'm assuming it's. But I was to say, because she's got she has a couple of series, and I have them. And I'm trying to remember what year they came out, but I'm assuming they're bumbling guards to an extent. She was big into trying to like write things that are really shocking and dark. Was kind of her trademark with it, even though the first book in it's the Book of Words, I think is what it's called, the series. It's called The Baker's Boy, and it presents as like it's the most traditional trope-filled schlocky fantasy. And the opening makes it really clear that is not what you're about to read. So I'm really curious to read more of the stuff. But I've not actually read any Jones yet. But as Dave Narsil was here, he'd be after me. He's a big fan of Jones too, from the Discord. But I'll get there.
That's the problem with watching all you booktubers is I have so many books to read. And like I said, I read 2, maybe 3 books a month, and I'm like getting 10 to 12 new books that I'm end up buying. And I'm like, I will read this someday before I perish. Maybe.
Oh boy, do I know that feeling. So I before BookTube, I had this one shelf, which was newer for me, and then I have one other shelf I've had for like over 10 years. That was it. And then I start getting on BookTube. I start finding more books, and then I have these other 2 shelves. The one over here is overflowing. I have a half shelf off screen over here covered in books, and like counting up the number of unread books that I own, and I'm just like, ugh. I that's where I have started to look at it. There's some series I'm like, before I die, maybe I'll read this series, but there's so much stuff out there. And then I start finding out about all the indie stuff, which is like, it's a blessing and a curse because there's so much of it, and so much of it I loved. And, I found just all kinds of indie authors that I've had a great time reading their stuff with. But then I'm like, they're all writing really long series like you, for one, which also I love. Don't get me wrong, I love my long series, but I'm like, you'd like, oh, there's going to be 7 in yours, and Meredith plans like 9, and there's several others. I know even like on the sci-fi ones, like JC and Byrne, he's writing a really long series, and so all these ones, I'm like, you guys are going to kill me and or make me have to buy really expensive shelves that I don't have room for.
So a couple years ago, I got rid of over 4,000 books. And I just do Kindle now because I can carry my entire library. And the only books I keep are the ones that are old and they didn't do Kindles for, at least last time I checked. So, yeah, I got rid of the poor librarian. I showed up with 29 boxes of books to donate.
I bet they had a fun time with that.
She was working by herself like on a Saturday, and she's like, well, just put them on the little table in the foyer there. I'll take care of them before I leave. I'm like, no, you won't. No, there's 29 boxes. And she's got this horrid look. She's like, how many? I'm like, I'm hoping to do it in just 2 trips, but it might take 3. And she's like, will it fit in the foyer? I'm like, we'll stack them, up the 5 high if we have to. Yeah, they'll fit. And she was just horrified. But I was like, I made the choice, get them out before I change my mind. So
I can understand that. I never thought I would ever be able to get used to reading on a Kindle. Same with audio. I never thought I'd be able to do audio, but I do all 3 formats now, and I do really enjoy it. It's a great way to try stuff out too. Where like, maybe I'll pick up an ebook on a sale or something, and then go buy the book later if I want it. Or even borrowing digital copies from the library is nice too. So, but I still have a physical book problem for sure. But I'm sure I'll hit that day where I'm at critical mass. There's books flying out everywhere, and like my house is gonna implode because of all of the weight of the books. And so, well, we'll probably have to eventually do a really big unhaul, I'm sure.
Yeah, I always tell people, I'm like, if thieves ever came in to steal from me, they would be so disappointed. They're like, he has books. They're not worth
unless they're fantasy nerds.
I mean, they're going to be like, what? Does he have anything valuable? No. He has pictures of fantasy stuff on the walls.
Like, oh, man, we got the wrong house for sure. The wrong house. Oh, man.
I mean, maybe they'll take my mannequin, but,
they could, but I feel like, yeah, if my house get robbed, then I'd like the first thing I would check on is the books, probably. And at least I have a list of all of the books. So that would be the positive thing. I've started getting better at cataloging them as my collection has spiraled out of control. And so I'm actually behind on that a little bit, but there's so many books. So the people who tell me they just do Kindle, I'm like, it's a great choice. I wish I could make myself do it and get rid of my books, but I don't think I can yet. So maybe someday.
The bad thing is I'll be like, you know what, I'm going to buy this book. And I go onto Amazon, like, you bought this book 3 years ago. And I'm like, now I have to find it on my Kindle.
I could see that too. I've had that before where somebody tells me about a book and I look it up and I'm like, oh, I got that already on Kindle. Because I'll whenever I see when authors, and especially a lot of self-pub authors, will do the 99-cent sales, or they'll temporarily be like, hey, it's free for 2 days. I'll snag all those up. I don't know when I'm going to get to them, but I will snag them so that eventually I'll read them and talk about them and all that kind of stuff. But it's led to me not always having any idea what all is in my Kindle library.
In case you run out of physical books, you'll have those Kindle books as backup.
Yeah. And Kindle is so nice for traveling so that I don't have to take physical books. Because I was straight up the person who would take at least one, and then depending on how long I was gone and where I was in the book, multiple physical books with me on a vacation or something. And it's not great when I can just grab my Kindle and I mean, heck, that'll fit in a pocket if it needs to. So I have one of the smaller ones, but it's convenient. It's convenient. But well, speaking of other forms of media, that was a terrible segue, but I tried. You also have, which I wanted to mention, a YouTube channel called Bald and Balding, which involves you and your co-host, whose name is escaping me right now, interviewing artists and authors. Oh, I think I cut you off. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Rosaire. He's the other one. Yeah, we when we go to Comic-Cons, I told you before we're out live, at least I think it was, that you get there, you get set up 90 minutes before the doors open, and then you just walk around going, do you think today will be a good sales day? And you have this conversation with 7-8 different people who no one knows the answer. He's like, why don't we take this dead time and actually interview other authors, other artists, creatives, broadly listed, and then we can just that way we can tell their story on YouTube, and you can find people who I mean, I tell everyone now, if you're getting inundated with people wanting to send you books, I'm probably to blame. So, but I'm like, booktubers, they're the nicest people in the world. My God, why are you not doing this? Spiffbo, why are you not in Spiffbo? You need to do Spiffbo next year if you can get in the first 42 seconds before it's filled, or whatever it's going to be next year. And it's nice. I talk to them, you talk craft a little. It's nice. And then you're like, okay, well, we'll put this video up. Maybe it gets you a sale. If not, it's better than asking if you think today's going to be a good sales day again.
Yeah. So. I know I have had at least one person reach out to me like, hey, I talked to Mike Mollman at a con, and he talked about BookTube and whatnot. And so I've had at least one person reach out, and they had they were really familiar. Like, they looked at a bunch of my videos. They're like, oh, here are all the things you love that I love. And it was this really nice message, and I'm excited to read their books here. So, I mean, networking can help for that too. And it's always to me, that's such a cool thing. It's just a guy who talks about books on YouTube to have somebody be like, hey, this other author who you really enjoyed their stuff and think is super cool, they recommended that I reach out to you about and I'm like, man, I feel like a minor celebrity, It's like, I know I'm just some guy on the internet, but it is cool. And I swear I didn't just add it now, but I have you can find the channel Bald and Balding in the description of the video now as well. It's definitely been there the whole time. I didn't forget to add it and remember as we were talking about it, but it is there if you want to check that out. There are a fair few episodes on there if you want to check that out as well.
Yeah, today's episode is a classically trained violinist who specializes in Scottish fiddle music. I mean, I know that's very pedestrian and everybody hears that all the time, but if you haven't, you may want to check it out.
I mean, sounds like a fun time to me for sure. I think so. Oh man. So I wanted to ask too, because you have, and you said it's going to be 7 books total with I think 4 main and then other stories in the middle.
Yep.
For the series.
Yep. 3 half books that are going to be novellas of side characters who meet Grommy and don't die, which is a thing to be proud of.
That's such a great way to describe it.
And then I want to, if you've read book 2, then Bodman and Ganna. I want to do prequels of their stories because Bodman is 250 years old and Ganna is, I don't know, 700,000, whatever I want to make her, and she's ancient. So I want to actually, after I finish the stories, I want to go back and tell their stories through time and how they got to where they got to. So.
Nice, thanks. And I'll super quick pull up here because your website is also super cool. And websites are definitely something that can vary a lot for authors. I've noticed too. You definitely look like you kind of knew what you were going for with it. But let me pop it on the screen here really quick. The website is super cool. Is that actually? Yeah, there it goes. It popped up weird. So the website is cool here too, and it actually shows the books. Which the other thing, and I can't remember if we were talking about this live or not, or this might have also been before. But the fact that you do have planned out here, and you already talked about how you changed the cover for Desperate Dispatchers, but you've got cover art out here, which yes, and also yes, these are some fantastic looking covers.
So look at the last book. Look at the main character there.
I was gonna say I see a little bit of a resemblance. Let's see if I can zoom in. Let's see. Oh, there we go. A little bit of a resemblance there.
Oh, sorry, this way. Yeah. So I realized that I described Loris as middle-aged, fat, and bald. I'm like, wait a second. So I actually, out in my front yard, I got dressed up in the Druid costume there behind me with the pole, and I had my neighbor taking pictures of me. I'm like, the rest of the neighbors, if they don't know I'm nuts by now. this will push him over.
That would be an interesting scene to come across. Like, why is the neighbor dressed like that outside doing a photo shoot? What's happening here? That's a really cool way to kind of like jump into the book like that, though, for sure. Oh, but yeah, the fact that you've got it planned out like that, I think, is cool. And like, I've got bookmarks, which my wife is using one of them, actually, too, at the moment. So it's already moved around a little bit, because she always says that she's using the Druid bookmark. But like, I've got a bookmark for like book 4 and book 3 and whatnot. So like I feel like you're ahead of the curve with like having it prepared and planned out. Kind also from talking to you. With all like the world building, I know you planned out. So talking a little bit more about writing, are you the kind of person who does what is it, like planners and pantsers, or I always forget the terms.
Yeah.
But like where do you fall with what's planned and what's organic?
Well, I always told everyone I'm a plotter, 100% plotter. I have an outline. I cannot write unless I know where I'm beginning and where I'm ending. And that's for the book, for the chapter, you name it. And so I make, 2.5 page outline of the whole story. And like, these are the notes that I have to hit, and this is how I'm going to get there. And then I start writing, and the characters are like, nah, I'm not doing that. And so then I'm like, oh, okay, well, we have to get to this end point. We can take a different path, but, and I start negotiating with fictional characters, because that's what you do in a completely normal, regular household. And so I found that I plot because I have to know that it's possible. What I'm having done, I'm like, okay, if they're going to get to here, they have these trials and tribulations. How can I do it without, logical inconsistencies? And so I plan it all out, and then I go take a hard left turn and like, okay, but let's get back. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. I always do plot first. Because I had a class once with a guy who said, if you give me 5 interesting characters who just sit around talking to each other, I don't need a plot. And I just want to stand up and scream, no, no, that's a waste of 5 interesting characters. So I need the plot. So I do the plot first. And then when I go back, that's when I'm like, okay, they're pretty wooden. And let's give them, what are their motivations? Let's write that in. And then I go back a third time, and I'm like, yep, we're in a white featureless room again. Let's put some setting in. So it's very much like laying down tracks. You do the plot, then you do the characters, and you do the setting. And then if you're writing, the best advice I can give you is that listen to it. I have editing out loud is like $30 a year, and you can upload your files and it'll read it in a not terrible voice. And I just do that, and I'm like, that is the most stilted conversation I've ever heard. And it just, when I get stuck, I listen to it to, try to, or else I will literally print it out at work. And then I stop at the library on the way home like, okay, I'm sitting here for an hour. I can stare at the ceiling if I want, or I can work on this, but just to not type, but instead I'm just using pen and paper. So it's a different format. Or if I listen to it, which listen is like the power move. That's the one I save till the end, because I can only really do it once. After that, I start hearing what I want to hear. So I'm like, save that towards the end, but that's when I'd be going over there now. And you're like, okay, that can't stay. Let's make it coherent. And it just, all the little things. So yeah, like I said, I print it out, and I have a red pen, and I sit there and mark it up, and then I go home and I change it, and I'm all happy, because when I type, my biggest thing is I type to instead of go, or do instead of so. All these 2-letter words that end in O that you think you should be able to spell, no. And I found that I actually spell of wrong, and I spell it fo, F-O. And spell checker doesn't catch that either for some reason. So I'm always changing my little prepositions and whatnot and verb. So when I send it to my editor and I get it back, I'm like, you can argue Mike doesn't even know English after, all the bloodbath of, getting it returned. But yet listening to it is absolutely, that I don't know how many times I've been like, you know what? No, this doesn't work. And so when people say, you know, they like my dialogue, I'm like, well, that's because I actually listen to it, and be like, no one talks like that. So
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I didn't even realize there was an editing thing where like you put your stuff in and it reads it out in a voice like that. But that seems like that'd be really, really helpful for sure.
yeah,
I
they
can
say
definitely
they
see
have
that.
it, like you can sign up so beta readers will listen to it, but no one ever does. And I'm not really looking there for it. It's just I put it up there so I can put it on my phone, and I can usually go for a walk and I listen to it, and then I have to keep stopping. And you know, I found that walking doesn't help because I have to stop and then make a note of everything I want to change. So, but even if you just sit and you look at it and you're forced to look at all the words as they're saying it, you know, like immersion read, just not with a good, you know, narrator. But it really helps a lot. And that, I mean, you can't go without proofreaders, but that makes me more confident once I can do that. And I'm like, okay, this is 90% there.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. I feel like that'd be helpful. Well, and since we're talking about the reading out loud of the books, that seems like a good segue to talk about the audiobooks. Because I did a mix. Because I read the first book, just all physical. And then you sent me, I think, 1.5 audio. And
Yep.
so I did that one. That one I did all audio. And then with book 2, I hybrid read. And like I'd switch off between what I was doing there with it. But I feel like the narrator fits the books very well, kind of a different kind of narrator. But what was the process like finding the narrator that you felt? And I know I've heard you talk about before how much you just loved exactly how it sounded, the way your narrator did it. So like, what was that whole process like?
So when I was at one of my author conferences, I was talking to a guy who had his book on audiobook, and I was like, you know, walk me through it. What's the process? And he's telling me, he goes, and the coolest thing is when you upload your chapter, then you get to do an actor call where people will actually, you know, read it for you. I'm like, wait, I get to call actors? I'm like, is that allowed? You know, and he said, he goes, and I listened to like 30 people, and I finally, when he goes, I heard the guy's like, oh my God, he goes, I got chills because that was my main character's voice that I heard in my head. And he's like, so, you know, just do that. And when you hear the voice, you know the voice, and you're done. So I finally did it. And I got to Amazon. I put in, you know, English, like, okay, American or English or British. And I said British. And then it exploded and had 42 dialects. They're like, which dialect do you want? I'm like,
Oh, wow.
I don't know. I'm like, estuarial? That's a dialect? What is that?
I have no idea what that means.
That's the news readers apparently.
Oh,
But I did not know that, so
I would have never.
So I had to stop, and I had to go on the YouTube and, you know, put in West Country dialect, you know, Liverpudlian dialect. You know, I'm like, and I was like, well, this takes place in the West Country, so let's, you know, so I had to deduce what dialects were there, and I put out a call for that, and I had 9 people, and only 2 of them could do the West Country dialect, and the others, some were Welsh, and one guy was from, I think from Kansas, and just had, you know, very flat American accent. He's like, I can't do British accents, but here, I'll read I'm like, thanks, but
not quite what you're looking for.
And one guy had, please excuse the dog barking in the background. I'm like, no, if you can't, you know, this is your interview process.
A little bit of red flag.
So I had the 2, and I liked both of them. The one guy I was going to go with, and then this guy was like the last one to. And as soon as I heard him, I was like, yes, if I can afford this guy, I'm going with him, because he's been in 36 plays or something like that in England. He's been in a couple TV series. He's in Masters of the Air, which is the Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg follow-up to Band of Brothers. So I don't know. I think it's on Apple. I don't have Apple. So, but anyway, I mean, he's been in. So I was like, yeah, you know, he's a professional actor. He should know how to do this. And so, yeah, I just talked to him, and he's like, okay, what kind of accent you want? I'm like, West Country. He's like, I'm from Bristol. You mean I can just talk normal? I'm like, yes. I'm like, no American accent necessary, you know, no London, you know, just so yeah, he does an amazing job. And I've heard other authors, they're like, you get all the files back, you upload it, and then Amazon says, we have a problem with chapter 17, redo it. And you have to go back and forth and back. And I've never had that. Everything has been, within 5 minutes, okay, you're approved. It'll launch in a couple days when we decide to, because why should you have a say in that? And we will decide the price, because why should you have a say in that either?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
That is great, though, I had no idea that, because I've talked to some other people about the audio process and finding a narrator, and like I know some people use like ACX.
Yeah.
Some is that because that is Amazon.
That's Amazon, yeah. Well, Audible.
Yeah. Or
So,
in there, yeah. But I had no idea about like the whole dialect things and like things that feels like that falls into the camp of things you would never in a million years think that you need to know to publish a book ahead of time. Like, you need to choose between 40 different dialects for what you want. But I don't know. I love getting somebody and they're like, oh, you just want my like normal voice? Like, that's all I have to do. And like, he does a really good job, though, is the thing. Like, it's not just somebody just talking. Like, him being in theater makes so much sense from the way he narrates, because he has a little bit of flair, not too much. It's not like, over dramatized or anything, but he just like he's good at what he does, and you can tell for sure. So
he's also the lead singer. He's also the lead singer in a band. So I think books 1 and 2, I have like a ballad, which I was all kinds of nervous about. And I was like, what are they going to do when I try to write poetry? And he just busts out singing. And I'm like, man, okay. If you're going to do that, then I don't have to worry, because people are going to be floored by your effort. And it doesn't matter that the words are subpar.
I mean, it's always interesting. And I do feel like if you have a narrator that A is a good narrator and B fits the book and the tone and the style, I do feel like that can make a really big difference. And I mean, in today's day and age, so many people use audio, and like some people kind of primarily do it because it's what they have time for, like, especially if they commute. Yeah, I mean, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's one of those things that I had never used audio. I'd never really tried it. And I've heard a lot of people say this. I'm like, I'm going to get distracted. I'm not going to be able to focus. And so I started with a reread, and I did The Wheel of Time on audio. I went through the whole thing for a reread on audio. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is actually fantastic, because if I'm doing something around the house, or if I'm driving, if I'm mowing the lawn, times I can't actually read, I can still be like reading and like still consuming it. And so it is great. And like audio can make a big difference. I've had audio books where I start it and I'm like, nope, can't listen to this. Don't like the narrator, or it isn't working for me. And so it's a big thing. But I mean, I read your books both ways, physical and on audio. And so, and I enjoyed them both, but a really good audio. So for those of you who are audio people, I do recommend the audiobooks for these, because they're really, really good. Narrator does a fantastic job and just fits the tone of the story really well, I think.
So hey, Nico, can I extend an offer? If there are people who want the audiobooks, I still have lots and lots of free codes that I cannot give away to save my life. So if you DM me in Discord, I will happily give you the codes. Especially if you're from England, I have like 35 codes.
Oh man,
I cannot give them the way. I mean, at this point, I'm just take them, because they do me no good to hoard them. So So yeah, if anybody wants them, DM me in Discord server, and I will happily send them to you. And I have them for the first 3 books.
I just say, and he's in our Discord as well, which that link you can find in the description of all of the videos and whatnot. But yeah, definitely check out. And I think I've definitely gotten some takers. But yeah, I've seen you do a few offers. I'm surprised you still have any left, but I know we had a lot of people reading recently too. So it's
last month was magical. 2 different Discord servers had buddy reads. I had 18 reviews on Goodreads in July alone for becoming a Druid. I mean, it's like every day I looked, I was like, and another review. And I mean, wow. I was floored. So
I'm going to put a comment in the chat, just because then if somebody's watching the replay, they'll see it quicker. Okay. There we go. Just want to put that in there. Yeah, it's always, I don't know, it's so fun for me too. Because like I've talked about the books several times, and like I know a few people who specifically picked it up, talking about it, and then I love talking more, seeing other people, going back and forth and seeing. It's always such a fun experience. And I'm often so behind on like the buddy reads and like the recommendations, or like Andrew has added like 50 million books to my TBR that I'm still trying to get to. So when it's like, yes, I'm ahead of the curve, I've read these already, I get to just sit back and have fun with the conversations. It's really nice, because usually it's like, oh, what's this? Oh, I still haven't read that yet. I have many things to read. So it's fun to be on the good side of it for once with it. But I always just love seeing, seeing people getting excited and reading stuff too is so much fun.
So yeah, I never ever, like I said, 2017 I started writing. Never thought this would happen. I tell people at work, I'm like, this was never the plan. And now I'm like, I don't know how far I can go, but I'm going to try to see. I'm going to write the best I can, and the die will be cast one way or the other. And I just, I still lose money every year in writing, but it's a hobby. I used to have a saltwater fish tank, and this is nowhere near as expensive as that. So
yeah, I mean, that's a great way to look at it. It definitely, it can be an expensive hobby, for sure, with publishing and everything. And that's where it's like, I know it's got to be, it's difficult kind of figuring out where to put your expenses, especially when you're doing, you're paying for cover art and for audio and for all of these things too, which is why, setting a $1,500 goal on Kickstarter for a new book seems very reasonable to me personally. That's a good way to
well, thank you for that.
I figured it'd be a good segue back over to it. But yeah, I mean, I feel like there are a lot of expenses, and that's something too. We're talking about the self-pub process, which we've kind of chatted about that here and there, but it's always interesting to hear too. But do you have any other like tips or tricks with the self-pub process, or like advice based on your experience too? I always like talking about that because got a lot of self-pub authors or just people interested in around, and I feel like everybody's always got some wisdom to impart.
So for becoming a Druid, I hired a developmental editor, which was expensive, but literally the best money I've ever spent, because she's the one like, these are the rules. These are what you have, I know you can break all the rules, but no, all your world building has to be in the first 25% of your book. After that, it has to be action, especially your first book font, I mean, she just, these are the ways to go. And so I did that. And then I am horrible at writing, so I need an editor. I don't trust just having one proofreader to catch all my mistakes. So I actually have one, and then I make the changes, and I send it out to a second one to try to, and I still have typos in my book. You will never get rid of the typos. But I don't pay for the developmental editor now, because it was like $3,000. But I mean, when you don't know anything, I mean, it was the best money I could have spent, because I learned so much. Just like, look, this is the way it is. This is, and she'd give me pointers. And she's the one who told me originally, she goes, well, your book's pretty good, but the ending's pretty weak. I'm like, wait, I cannot have a bad ending. So I rewrote the whole ending, and I was like, this is so much better. Oh, thank God she said that. So, but then I said, I don't have that kind of money. I could have got a developmental editor, and I wouldn't have audiobooks. So I'm kind of, which one do you want to do? So now Roe is an author. He's published 8 books. So when he does my line edit, he also does some, you could make the tension better here if you did X, Y, Z. So I kind of get a little developmental when I'm getting my line edit done.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So, and my friend at work, Wyatt, is my alpha reader. And he hates fantasy, but he reads it because we're friends. And whenever I give it to him and he comes back, he'll always have a big smile on his face. And I'm like, oh no. What plot hole did you find? And that's why he always has a big smile. He's like, so you have this, however, because originally in becoming a druid, he's like, so why doesn't Grommy just become a bird and fly back to his mentor at this point, or at this point, or at this point? I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. I have the token. So that's why Figo ended up sticking with him a little longer, because I need to have, and then that's why he kept going over the limits of his power, because I was like, I need him to not be able to fly back home. And so, which I think some people have been like, he does it over and over. There's no consequences. I was like, well, it wasn't supposed to be there, but there's a gaping plot hole. So, but he does that, and he's like, why don't you do this? I'm like, that's a gorgeous idea. Yes. And, so I elicit ideas from, and my buddy Jeff, who I call my agent of chaos, he is the one who just, if you remember chapter, I think it's 6 in Becoming a Druid, when Grommy goes home and goes to the mead hall, that whole scene, I went to and was like, Jeff, Grommy's supposed to stay for like 5 days, but it's a boring podunk town, and I don't want to write 4 or 5 days of boring podunk stuff. So something has to happen that he has to leave town the next morning, but it can't be like murder where like be hunting him forever. He has to be able to come back again if I decide he ever wants to go home. What can I do? And this is a little bit of spoiler, but it's like chapter 6 in the first book. So
it's early on. It's mild.
He's like, he burns the whole place down. I'm like, okay, that's like, level 13. I'm looking for like level 6. But, he's like, he's the reverse of the Pied Piper. He calls rats that infest the entire city. I'm like, okay, now we're up to 17, and I still want 6. I'm like, but what if he calls the rats and they get on the thatch roof, because I did my research, and that's the type of roofs they had. If you have too many, they get heavy. The roof falls into the fire. I'm like, so then we can kind of combine the ideas, and it's an accident. And that I have never laughed so hard as when I wrote that scene, because
that was a really fun scene.
When I wrote Grommy, I decided early on, I was like, you know what, like between like the age of 18 and 21, when you're like, I've graduated high school, I know everything that needs to be known, I am smart. And it's called the 18-year-old itis, when they know everything, and parents are dumb and adults are. I'm like, yes, he's going to be in that range. He's a little old for it, but he's still going to be. And so, nothing could ever go wrong if I summon rats here, And so that's the whole, when I write that, and I'm just like, is he really going to do that? Yes. Yes, he is. And the answer is always yes. So
I love that does fill in. You did mention the Agent of Chaos as part of the team on the Kickstarter, so that makes sense. But I love it. Just sounds like you have such an interesting kind of group of people and little inspirations. And it's like I feel like almost like you could write like a little narrative just about the interesting ways that your books have come to be, just because it's such a fun story, all the little anecdotes, the different scenes and everything. And so this is why I love doing these kind of casual conversation style interviews. 100% it's just all of the fun things that we end up talking about that just like I would have never known to ask about that scene, or like the Agent of Chaos, to like find out that there was a great story behind it. Really enjoyed the scene. I thought it was great, but
that is still my favorite scene of all the books I've written. That is my favorite scene. And I always just go back and I just sort of laugh, like, he burned down the mead hall. I said before, I'm a chemist, so everyone I work with is weird. Everyone in their own unique way. And I love nothing more than to go down the rabbit hole. And why do you think this is normal? And, I will stick and, let them explain. So, yeah.
That's why it's funny too. You'd think, I don't know, I don't know many chemists specifically, but I feel like there'd be a good amount of fantasy overlap there, or maybe they're sci-fi people, but who knows?
So, and the one thing I did I found interesting, because I do, if you go on my website, I actually have D&D modules based in my world.
Oh, really?
I have never played D&D in my life.
I surprisingly haven't either.
So and so that's Jeff, my agent of chaos. He and I do it because he knows how to do the mechanics. And I'm just like, here's the setting, go play. And I was on a panel, and they had like 4 different authors and then me, and they're all like, how are you so creative? How are you so creative? And they all are like, well, I play D&D, and I don't, take the things that happen directly, but, it gets you thinking. It sparks the creativity. And I'm like, so to be a better writer, I have to start playing D&D. This is what I'm taking from this. So I keep telling myself I'm going to start, and then I'm like, well, as soon as this book is done, I'll start. As soon as I write this, do this one, but sooner or later, I'm going to start playing D&D just because. So
yeah, it's always one of those things that it's weird that I never have. I've just not really known people who did. Or I would totally would have, but I definitely feel like I'm the type of person who should have played some major D&D in my life, and just for whatever reason never has. So
yeah,
I didn't realize that was on there either. That's cool.
Yeah, I always tell people I'm D&D adjacent.
I mean, I can see that. That makes sense with, like you said, kind of the, Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance kind of things as being some inspiration. I mean, like, it makes sense. I could see this being D&D adjacent. It doesn't feel quite like those books, which is probably a positive thing, because some of them haven't aged the best. But yeah, I could D&D adjacent makes sense. I might co-opt that the next time somebody asks me if I've played D&D. I'm like, no, but I'm D&D adjacent as a nerd, So
And my buddy Jeff, when he's doing the D&D, he rolled up a sheet for Grommy. He's like, he can't change into animal form that often. You have to change your book. I'm like, no. He goes, he's going to be a level 8 apprentice. Whoever heard of a level 8 apprentice? I'm like, I don't know. Is that high? So,
well, I mean, that's his thing, though. He's particularly good at anamorphing, and that's where, like, I was going to say this earlier, and I was trying not to. I'll be as very minorly spoiler as possible here, but there are consequences for anamorphing for people in the books, and not everyone can do it. Not all the druids are good at it. It's one of those things that, like, druids can definitely have different specialties, and so I feel like he made that work, where, like, he's extremely good at this thing, so to the point where it's a problem sometimes in the book, because he's a little too good at it. Not everyone's happy with that. But I mean, like, the way you wrote it too, and there's a particularly big plot point, which I will not mention at all, that involves the dangers of anamorphing. So I feel like, for me personally, it felt balanced out more by, like, he's not just this crazy overpowered person with everything. He's particularly good at this one thing. And that can be really helpful sometimes. Other times it's not that helpful. But so it's I for me, it balanced out for that reason, and I could see the consequences elsewhere. So I feel like it worked.
And before I started, I looked at the different types of magic, and I tried to, let's put them all out here. I don't want one to be overpowering the rest, or else why would you so I tried to, okay, here are the pluses, where are the negatives. And so I tried to make them so that one is not necessarily always the best. So, and there's actually 5 magic systems, but I think only 4 will be talked about in this series. And the 5th one is to be determined later. Well, I mean, I know what it is, but it doesn't show up really in this series. So
I love all of the things that you have plans and details for that'll probably never be in the series, but you just want to know. So I could just relate with that level of the world builder's disease a little bit, where you just want to keep doing it. I don't know. I identify with that so much, because, like we were saying earlier, I love world building. I enjoy world building aspects a lot more than most people do in books. I feel like it's just it's one of those things I love a lot. I should ask, though, if we've got any final call for questions in the chat here. If you get them in, we're probably just slightly over that mark here. We've done pretty good, though. We were both talking before that, like, we're both the kind of people who could just probably talk for hours without realizing it. And so I try to keep a good time where it's not too terribly long, so that people don't have to sit for hours to watch it with it. But if anybody's got any final any questions in the chat, But otherwise, any final thoughts or any other things that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to? I feel like we did cover like a really wide variety of topics, which has been a blast. But if you've got any final thoughts?
No, like I said, the shiny new thing is I want to start writing about my Spain series. So like I said, I have the map. There's 6 different civilizations. I fleshed out how they're different from one another and what their, histories are, at least a little bit. I'm not going to write this for another 2 years. So, but Spain, I think, oddly enough, I'm like Pretanni, I think I made too simple. So it's going to be politics and religion and everything is way much more complex there, which hopefully I can pull out. And it still scares me to death when I write book 4 because it's going to be basically battle all the time. And I've not really done, I've had fight scenes that last a chapter maybe, but I'm like, I've never tried this. I hope it works, but we'll see. I won't release the book until I'm happy with it. So hopefully it's not a George R.R. Martin thing.
Fair enough for sure. It doesn't look like we've got any more things. We still got several people here with us, but I guess we answered all their questions. This is one of those times where I'm glad I didn't write a lot of pre-formatted questions because we would have crossed all of them out of order long before, which is always fun anyway, but with kind of meandering. But Mike, thanks so much for joining. This has been so much fun just talking through your books. I'll just give a final call. Like I said, check the description for the Kickstarter. We've got the rest of the books available here, but you do have the option for the new one, which is 2.5 Desperate Dispatches. You can get hardcover, paperback. You can add on hardcover and paperbacks or ebooks of all the other books too. So definitely check it out. A lot of great stuff there, and you can check out Mike's website and YouTube channel as well for more great content there. But appreciate you coming by for the show. It's been a blast.
Thank you, Nico. You're awesome.
Thanks. We'll do the old long goodbye here.